with enough exposure, with enough examples, most of the errors we make will disappear. And sometimes I have the feeling I'm a bit like Mary Poppins, in the classroom. I'm there, I have my toolkits and I go from tables to tables and I try to listen to what they say. Most errors, I just let it go. I let them take risk, try things out. But at another stage, they are a bit less common. So then I have a work I give a tool like, hey, do you want to try this?
I see a lot of teachers who are still on the structure-based instruction. They rely heavily on teaching grammatical rules explicitly, using gap fills. And the difference I'm noticing is this generation of students, they're not as receptive to this kind of learning anymore. They have evolved, but we haven't.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, I think you touched on a couple things. I think you're right. They need to see themselves in the curriculum for one. They need to see how it relates to their lives outside. And I think that's the importance of these dynamic approaches.
This lack of coherence have costed us, I think, the communicative approach we wanted. If you test your learners with vocabulary tests, with grammar tests, you don't teach communicatively. Politically, something has to change if you want to change how we see teachers. Being a teacher is not only a passion, it's also a profession. So you need to have a very professional context in which teachers have the space to, because they are the professional. They don't need to rely on textbooks because that somebody else wrote for them. If they are professionals and know what they do and know what they want, they have to gain also that confidence that they are the ones who have that knowledge. They can see themselves as professionals. And I would like also to stress the fact that being a teacher is showing ambition. Because you have the ambition to really make a difference, to give forward to a new generation. You need to be very ambitious to do that. And so to give a bit more status to that profession.
This is the Teacher Talking Time podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Teacher Talking Time podcast for language teachers, language educators, researchers, applied linguists, and all that jazz. Everyone who listens to this podcast, I'm sure, enjoys the work that we have been doing. So right before we start this, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, our podcast on any podcast platform that you listen to. And today's guest is someone that I have been wanting to interview for quite a while. And unfortunately, our schedules didn't match at first, but she is finally here. She also comes highly recommended by a good friend of mine who also works at the same university that she's in. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, we have here on the studio with us today, Audrey Rousse-Malpat. Did I pronounce that correct, Audrey?
Yeah, the French way you could say Rousse-Malpat.
Rousse-Malpat.
And my
like in Rousseau.
And I've it starts the same.
Nice. Welcome.
So thank you for the reference. I mean, and hello everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're very excited to be here. We're very excited to have you here. We've exchanged a couple of messages, and we're really happy that you're going to be here because we have lots of questions to ask. I think we're going to have a great conversation, and I find that usually the best place for us to start is from the beginning. So the question that I'm going to ask you, it's a question that a lot of our guests have said that they really enjoy being asked. So I'm going to ask you the same question. Who is Audrey? And why does your work, your research matter?
Who am I? Well, that's a long life question, I would say. But I'm really a teacher. So I like to give forward. I like to help people to have a good life for themselves, to be happy. I do that through teaching, but also through being a mom and a friend. I'm all that. And I want it all, of course. I want to have the career and the life and everything. So I'm quite exigent with myself, I would say. But I do have a mission here, and I've been working for quite a while now to improve education. And language is something special for me because through school, I've been able to be happy in life. So in a way, I want to give that to other people as well. And through languages, through traveling a lot when I was 17, 18, going to Finland and other countries. I'm from France originally. It opened my mind to cultures and things, and it really helped me to be to strive to be a good human being. And that's something that is really a red line in my life. And my strength, I think, is that I'm not traditional. I'm a bit atypical, but it's okay. But I like to be a researcher, so somebody that could be very conventional and translate all those ideas that I understand, but I know that a lot of people do not understand, to people who need it. So in my work, what I try to do is to read all the stuff, to get inspired by the work of a lot of our colleagues on theories, on cognition, on language, to take those ideas, to translate them into practice, and to bring that to the classroom. So that's what I do.
Great.
Wonderful.
I don't know if I answered the question very good, but
But you did say that you describe yourself as being atypical. Could you elaborate on that? In what ways are
Right.
you atypical or not a traditionalist as you described yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a scientist, but I'm very much driven by my intuitions and my emotions, and so that's not very typical in the world we are in right now. I can be very effective and I can enter a box, but in a way I'm very much outside of the box as well. So in that I am a bit atypical. I'm a foreigner in a country, and I like to travel and take what I really like in a certain country and use it. So I'm not French anymore exactly as a French person would be when they've been living their whole life in France. I've been living for 18 years in the Netherlands, but I'm not Dutch neither.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a bit in between. That's maybe what's the most atypical about me. And around me, I have to say, in the academic world, there are many people like me, a bit citizens of the world.
It's interesting you say two things you said. I think the first one is you've been living there for so long, yet you still don't feel like you're Dutch. So, but you were born in France. You've been working in the Netherlands. How much do you think your identity has evolved or has changed or even has helped you with working in a foreign country and working with people who actually need or have to learn languages? To what extent do you think identity plays a role in all of that?
I think that I'm a language learner myself, and I learned it in different contexts, in classrooms, but also in the wild. So I have different experiences in how you can learn a language. And I know how is it to be a total beginner somewhere, to know nobody and nothing, and to have to start from scratch. So I know what it means to feel anxious about starting to talk. I know how it is to be uncomfortable with your own pronunciation. I also know how it is to feel defeated and powerless in front of a vocabulary list that you're convinced you will never be able to say or to learn. So all those things are things that I experienced myself. And as a researcher, as a teacher, it helps me a lot, of course, to have this experience. And the fact that I've been, so I when I was 17, I took a couple of weeks and I've been at school in Finland. When I was 18, I took a year off and I went to school in Spain. And when I was 23, I moved to the Netherlands and experienced the school system there. It's still Europe. It's still the European Union. And still I saw the major differences between those systems. And so I took a bit what I liked in every system and I try to help teachers right now to improve the situation, also to improve school for learners that are a bit atypical, so that have ADHD or dyslexic, or don't feel like their school is talking to them. And that's very interesting in the theory I work with, the dynamic usage-based theory, because it's a theory that takes into account individual trajectories. So that's what I've been learning from my previous experiences as a language learner. Yeah. And as a learner.
Yeah, I think that's sometimes overlooked, especially by scholars, right? The importance of personal practical knowledge in, what guides our craft or determines our day-to-day practice with our students. And I think it's beautiful that, hearing that from a scholar that's, giving equal weight, almost, maybe even more weight, to this idea of our own personal practical experiences as learners, as observers in the classroom. So I think that's beautiful.
I was going to ask you, because you said that you also think like a scientist, and I think it's important because you in a way you're playing in both worlds. You are in the classroom, but you're also doing research, and Mike likes to call this the term is a scholar practitioner, which is kind of what we try to embody as well. And there's a quote by Adam Grant. I can't remember which book. I think it was called Think Again. And he talks a lot about this idea of thinking like a scientist. And I remember his quote. He says, thinking like a scientist means you don't let your ideas become your identity. And I think the question I have for you, Audrey, and as a teacher, how do you ensure that you don't let ideas that you have, hypotheses that you have about language become part of your identity, become somewhat solidified to the point where you just don't change? You've been doing this because we know this. We know that there are a lot of practitioners, teachers who have been teaching the same way for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. And they say they have 30 years of experience, but in reality, they don't, because they've been doing the same thing for so long. So how do you maintain or keep this scientist hat on, or this scientist mindset on, when you are in the classroom?
Yeah, I'm very privileged because I am a scientist, that I have paid time to read stuff, to go to conferences, be up to date to the latest findings about how our brain works, what people have found. And it's not the daily life of most teachers in high schools or in schools. They have a big teaching load, and in a way, it's what I try to avoid, but it's what I see is becoming. School is becoming yet another factory, the factory of knowledge, of learning. Those teachers have to rely on textbooks that have been published by publishers who, most of them, are not linguists. And so they don't have enough time to really reflect, think, create. So I find myself very privileged in a way, because I do have that time. And what is important, in fact, is to continue to develop yourself as a professional. So professionalization is something you ask from a doctor, from a dentist, anyone whose field is in movement, in motion. And it would be very wrong to think that teaching is not in motion. What we know now about how our brain is wired and how we learn things and how our emotions play a role in that is precious and should be known, right, and considered by teachers. So with my colleague Wim Gombert and my other colleague Yanis Brain, we have a company now called Project Frans, and that's what we do. We give a course to teachers that are already in practice, and we teach them how to teach in another way. Change is a very difficult thing to achieve in education.
Yes.
Change takes a lot of time because there are a lot of stakeholders as well. A lot of stakeholders who have power know not much about learning or education. or not enough, in fact. And so my experience until now is that if you want to be an actor of change, you have to change bottom up.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes almost one teacher at a time for the moment. And so we've accepted that. and we try to do that. But it works like it has a very strong effect, because sometimes some teachers, they've been practicing what they learned in schools, maybe in 1980s, 1990s. And these were other theories, other thoughts on what language actually is. And so it has worked for them for a while, because you can learn languages in so many different ways. It depends what your learning objectives are. Right. What do you want to achieve? Is it communication you want to achieve? Is it accuracy? So for a long time, it has been working for them. They had maybe more hours during the week to teach languages. So then, you need less to maximize the exposure that learners need. But nowadays, you have to do a lot with not a lot, with a couple of hours. And so if you want to create change, you need to take time to really get inspired and get that knowledge. I use articles. There are now blurbs or articles in a website called Oasis, which is a website for teachers where research findings or written in a language that is easy to understand for people that are non-scientists. I listen to podcasts, but also create those networks of teachers and networks where teachers are in contact with researchers and where they can exchange. Because researchers learn also a lot from the teachers about the constraints of the practice. So I work a lot in high school, so most of my examples will be about this age group between 12 years old and 18 years old. The constraints you have with them is not only that you have to teach them a language. In fact, you have to push them to do something they don't want to do, but you have to make it in a way that they are happy to do it.
Yes. Engagement. We talked to Sarah Mercer recently, and she said that engagement is the Goldilocks of language education. No?
Right. And as a teacher, you have to be a magician in that, to create that engagement for a group of people in an age where they are preoccupied by so many different things and so insecure about themselves.
It's funny because there's also, I think, the reason why it's so difficult for us to change our practice and for us to change the way languages are taught is because there's also a little bit of habit inertia. I think we've been doing the same thing for so long that it's just so hard for people to start looking at language from a different perspective, to start thinking about teaching from a different perspective. But I think we have come a long way. I think COVID in a way has sped up that process. And I feel like we're coming. I think teachers are slowly coming to the realization that the nature of language is very different from other subjects like history, math, geography. And that we shouldn't be teaching languages like those things. As you said, like it's not a factory of learning or of learners, right? Where you're just regurgitating one grammatical rule at a time, which brings me to a very important question. A lot of your research has focused on this AIM. I think that's or is it AIM? I don't know if they pronounce the acronym as AIM.
Yes, they say AIM.
AIM. So
and in French, a lot of people say IEM.
IEM. AIM. Okay, we'll go with AIM.
AIM.
So I was wondering if you could perhaps elaborate more on what AIM is. I think it's like the accelerator or accelerative integrated method. So what is exactly AIM? What does it mean
AIM,
for language teaching? And how is that different from what we were just talking about, these traditional methods of instruction?
AIM is a method created by Wendy Maxwell. She's a Canadian teacher of French.
I've never heard of her. This is the thing.
In Ontario.
She's in
Ontario,
right? Which is, we never. Have you heard of AIM, Mike, before?
No.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't think a lot of people know, but yeah, continue.
Right. And she was a primary school teacher and for a long time very frustrated by the fact that the pupils in her class were learning French so many hours a week, but at the end of the journey, they couldn't say a word. And
Not surprised.
right.
Was
and
I one of her
it's a
students?
frustration.
Yeah.
Many teachers know this frustration. So she had the feeling she was failing, really, and decided to create something new. She's a very creative person. And she did a master's degree, and her supervisor for a thesis was Jim Cummins.
Oh.
And so what she did is that she took, in fact, many theories and approaches that we already knew in the literature. So there is some storytelling, some total physical response. There is quite a lot of the direct method as well. She combined many things that existed already, but she did it in a way that would be suited for the age group of our learners. So it's the method that you can use when you start from the very beginning a language, and that provides a lot of exposure. It's a target only method, so you only talk the target language from day one.
So there's no code switching. You're not going back and forth between languages.
So when I calculated in the classrooms how much French was used, it was close to 90%.
Oh wow!
There are moments where you use another language to introduce a new concept, or when you do comprehension checks. So you want to be sure that they understood that combination of words or whatever. So there are moments where another language can be used, but it's very restricted. And because, of course, when you create this immersion environment in a classroom, your learners will be, completely immersed in the new language they don't understand. It's good to have some help. And she uses gestures to, in a way, make herself clear from day one what she means, but also to help the learners to entrench what they've been learning.
Okay.
So there is one gesture for one word. And she uses stories.
And can I just ask a quick question? Because you just touched on it briefly. You mentioned that a lot of her work was with like some might consider very young learners. And it sounds like you're working with secondary students or high school students. So is this an approach that is more commonly found in like younger learner contexts, or just to help kind of contextualize the listener a little bit? Or has this approach been used in other contexts as well? Do you know?
So for now, it has been used in primary schools and high schools. And I know that she has been working, and it should be out now, on stories for migrant learners. So people who come from an immigration background and have to learn the language on a later age, so for adults. And I hear also, so because if I tell you a bit how it looks like, so you have stories that you tell to the learners, and the learners repeat the story, and they do a lot of activities around the story. There's a lot of art and music in the method as well, because it's based on repeating a lot, repetition of combination of words. And repetition can be boring.
Yes.
So if you don't want it to be boring, you have to vary a lot in the activities, the configuration you do, those activities in. And you need a goal that is fun and motivating. And the goal is to play the little story as a theater, as a play in front of the parents. That's their goal.
So there's a performance.
And
there's a performance.
there is a performance
Okay.
at the moment.
Yeah, there's like a
there
little
is
bit of pushed output there, right? Like where they're kind of thrown into it a little bit. Yeah, interesting.
What's interesting as well is that so every 10 minutes you change the activity, but the first activity is always the routines with a gesture where students have to repeat the little sentences, etc. And that's interesting in many different aspects. But it's also interesting because when you start a language and you're a bit self-conscious about how you speak it, we know that use is very important when you learn a language. You can do it in a choir. And so when you do it in a choir, you're not on the spot.
Right.
Nobody really hears you. So you have the space and the time to practice and say, repeat things as you wish and entrench what you're learning. So that's a very interesting part of the method. Another very interesting part is that this first 6 months is dedicated to oral skill.
Okay.
You don't write. You don't read. You just do speaking. You speak.
You're basically processing all the input that you receive, and then you eventually are able to produce. So it's very much like how we learn our first language in a way. You don't have to.
Very much.
Yeah. I actually just went on the website here, and it says she says here, one of the strategies includes linguistic reinforcement through pleasant repetition. What is this?
All right, yes, but she's aware of that.
Yeah, what's this pleasant repetition? So is it repetition of phrases? Is it repetition of words? Is it repetition of communicative functions? What are the learners? So you said stories. So they're basically telling stories? Is that what it is?
The teacher tells them a story, the 3 Little Pigs or a story. And the learners, they learn the story, the sentences of the stories. In fact, what they learn are routines, combination of words, what in the usage-based theory you would call a construction, or you would call a form meaning mapping. So it's actually words in combinations that you learn in the form of a routine. Pleasant means that she varies a lot in the way they repeat it. So it's not repetition as such. You can call it iteration, because in fact you repeat it but slightly differently. So what you take in is also slightly different.
Can you give me an example? Like I'm having a hard time visualizing that. Like what would be an example of that? Like, because you said they're doing this repetition in different ways. Does that change are you changing your tone? Are you changing your intonation when you repeat those words? Is that what it is?
You could, but an example would be that you have to repeat a question and an answer. For example, où est-ce que le petit cochon court? Le petit cochon court vers la maison de bois, for example. You could think in a classroom of 2 circles of learners, one inside, one outside, and they have to answer the question, but every time to another person, and the circle changes like this.
Okay.
So it has a purpose to say it again, because you don't say it to the same person.
Right.
It's meaningful. Meaningfulness is a key word also in usage-based approaches, and AIM fits really in that umbrella of usage-based approaches.
So they are repeating a language that has some sort of communicative value. They're not just repeating, for example, the book is on the table.
No, that's also a work that she has been doing. She created something called pared down language, which is a set of 700 words, more or less, that are highly frequent and highly meaningful when you want to talk about your life as a learner. And usually they are in a classroom, so that they need to say things about the environment and also simple things. If you want communication to be in the target language from day one, they need the tools to do that as well.
Yeah.
So this pared down language is what she uses to write those stories.
I'm actually reading another thing you said here, Audrey. She said, and I guess this is my assumption, so please correct me if I'm mistaken. She said, you work from the whole to the part as opposed from the part to the whole, which my interpretation of this is traditional language instruction. We go from parts to the whole. So we teach students words, and then we teach them grammatical structures, and then we expect them to communicate. In this one, you start with the whole, and then you break it down, and then you're showing them how to produce those parts that comprise the whole. Is that it? It's almost very much like task-based language teaching, where you're communicating the whole message, and then you can kind of go back and work on parts of it that needed more some sort of fine-tuning. Is that a correct interpretation of this?
Yeah, so you see language as holistic, has units of words in combination that are later analyzed. But at first, they are learned as a chunk, as a whole.
Yeah.
And research in usage-based approaches and dynamic usage-based approaches see language as those constructions, because language speakers, when they speak with each other, it's not random how they say things. Actually, most of the things we say are said exactly the same way by people around us. So we co-create and co-adapt a lot of our language, and the words are rarely in isolation.
Mm-hmm.
A verb in French goes together with a preposition, and it's quite random which preposition it is sometimes. But still, it's the conventionalized ways of saying something. So what she exposes learners to are those conventionalized ways of saying things.
Mm-hmm.
And the message overall, right? Yeah. And
Interesting. I actually didn't know about this aim. I definitely need to investigate this a little further. But since you're here, we're just going to keep asking you questions about that.
Right.
Yeah. What do you think? Because you have worked with this, you have a business that helps train, educate teachers on the aim. And I think one of the goals, as you mentioned here, is to really reduce that anxiety that is often connected, that is often associated with speaking. And you do this by, and I think the word that you used in one of your papers was de-dramatizing errors. How can teachers create a classroom environment that supports this? And not only that, what have you experienced? What have you seen in terms of the kind of impact that this has on the learner experience of learning a language?
Right. First of all, to come back to what you said, I'm not an AIM trainer. In the company I don't train teachers to do AIM. Jan Sprain, who is my associate, she does that.
Okay.
I researched AIM, and with my colleague Wim, we created the follow-up, because AIM stops at a more or less B1 level, more or less. And in high school, a lot of things that were applied, like the gestures or the topics, couldn't be applied for upper high school. So from 15 years old to 18 years old. And my colleague, Wim Gombert, he created AIM Extended, which is the follow-up. And we are both trainers now in AIM Extended. And so errors, or what we think of errors, is key, in fact, in learning, because to learn, you need to make errors. You need to create chaos. You need to have variability and try things out. You need to take risks. You need to be able to have the environment that offers you the space to make errors. That we see in many other research as well about dynamic systems and usage-based theories. Errors are very important. And so who says errors says feedback. So how you give feedback as a teacher and how you consider errors is very important. So in AIM, for example, there is only positive feedback given and very implicit feedback at the beginning. So it's about recap at the beginning and comprehension checks sometimes, but it's not very explicit, the feedback. More explicit feedback comes a bit later.
Right.
And it's more about modeling, so showing a lot of exemplar-based. So when you are a linguist and you know how language develops and changes, you know that most of the errors that you make at the beginning will disappear.
Yeah.
With enough exposure, with enough examples, most of the errors we make will disappear. And then you have to avoid those fossilizations of some errors and stay hanging there. And sometimes I have the feeling I'm a bit like Mary Poppins, in the classroom. I'm there, I have my toolkits, and I go from tables to tables, and I try to listen to what they say. Most errors, I just let it go. I let them take risk, try things out. And sometimes it's the third time I hear something that is not in line with the level they have. Because as a linguist, I know that some errors are just normal at this stage, but at another stage, they are a bit less common.
Huh.
So then I have a work I give a tool like, hey, do you want to try this? It will help you. So that's how you can see errors.
I think the question, and I was just thinking about this. I think the question that I think it's important for us to elucidate at the moment in this conversation, I think a lot of teachers are probably going to be asking this. And I think AIM is somewhat related to this, but in another research paper that you wrote, you talked about the differences between what we call a structure-based, what you describe as structure-based approach versus a dynamic use-based approach to communicative language teaching. I think it would be somewhat useful for people listening if you could explain the difference between these two, because I think a lot of teachers they don't think about structure-based teaching. I think that we have a different name for that in language teaching. People call it, PPP or teaching grammar explicitly, or But what is the main difference between structure-based approach and a dynamic usage-based approach to communicative language teaching?
Yeah. And it's a term that has been coined in a book that I read from Lightbaum and Spada. I think they talked about structure-based approaches. And I thought, that's exactly what we have at this point in the Netherlands. And people think it's communicative, but it's not.
Yeah.
Because it's the way you see language in a way. So a structure-based approach is when you think that rules are needed to learn the language. And that you need to explain those rules, to practice them, to correct mistakes if the rules hasn't been applied correctly. So an explicit approach to learning language through the structure of the language, through the rules, the grammatical rules. And then you will make decisions like, this rule is very simple, so I will teach it first. And this rule is very complex, so I have to wait a bit because they are not at this stage. So I have to wait until next year or so to explain something about relative pronouns or conditional time. So that's a way of seeing language. That's this way. And of course, because those rules are sometimes full of exception.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Again, I'm gonna coin Vim Patton here, because one of the things he said, which I fully agree, is a lot of these rules are not psychologically real, right? Like what a learner to learn a rule, and again, how do they create form meaning connections there? Like with a rule, like it just makes language is so abstract. And yet we're still resorting to teaching them rules, hoping that these rules are going to help them somehow produce language. It just makes absolutely no sense. So that's the structure base. So what's the other side of the pendulum here? What's the dynamic usage-based approach?
The other side is that you embrace the fact that everyone is learning trajectory, if you want. So not everybody is ready for the same things at the same time. So you don't have pre-planned structure there. What you do is that you offer a lot of exposure, affordance, we call it as well. So inputs that become intake. You offer a rich environment in terms of meaningful inputs with enough repetition, enough structures that come back, enough meaningful tasks of things to do for learners to use the language. And through the use, you will actually create and build a network of words in combination, words that are connected between how you say them, what they mean, but also when and where you use them. That's the pragmatics about it. So in fact, you see language as a network of constructions that have been conventionalized in a way by the people who speak them, who say those words. And you want to create an environment as a teacher so that learners can entrench those conventionalized ways of saying things. It's a very different take.
Very.
Because you lose a lot of control as a teacher. You have the feeling you lose control because you lose control of the intake. And so you have to believe, you have to trust the process that it works. And you can have control on what you organize, when and where and when. You can have control of when to say something or when to introduce something new. But the learning process happens in everyone's mind. And they are the only one who really know what's going on in there.
Just Leo, I really like, Audrey, how you really make that clear distinction between input and affordances. Because, I think Leo would agree, we've worked with a lot of teachers who think that, no, I need to present first. And this idea of kind of spoon feeding the message or just teaching a particular rule or explaining at first. And the difference being that, no, we don't need to provide this input. Rather, we just need to create opportunities, as you suggest, right? Opportunities for language to emerge, right? And for meaning to be made, right? So, and now I can see that connection, I think, between, say, some of the AIM approaches where you're using things like role plays and storytelling, where the main focus seems to be delivering and conveying a message. And that's where the learning occurs, not necessarily what the teacher is projecting onto the student. Am I right?
Right. And there are a lot of critics around the AIM method, also from scholars who look at it also like, okay, but that's what we did with the audiolingual approach and it didn't work neither. Or that was the direct method was like that. Or there is too much focus on the teacher and the language of the teacher. And you have teachers as well who find it a lot of work because it's quite an investment from the teacher at the very beginning. Because the teacher is then almost the only provider of that input. But this method changes over time. Because the gestures, for example, at a point after 3 years or when you arrive at a point of B1 level, you don't need them as much. And then it's okay to let them drop.
Yeah.
How you provide grammar at the beginning, very implicit, no grammar talk at all. If a learner asks you, but why don't you put an S here? I don't know, diversion, something. But then it becomes more inductive, an inductive approach to grammar. When you provide examples and you say, so why do you think, what is the regularity here? So there is a change over time, and that is sometimes overlooked.
Yeah. No, I think it makes a lot of sense from the perspective of not, as you said, Mike, I think a lot of us, for some reason, make this wrong. We make this wrong assumption that everything that we use in the classroom, everything that we provide to learners in the classroom is input. Not every, like, to me, presenting a grammar rule, that's not input. That's because, again, I don't expect them to do anything with that. But if you're having a conversation with them, if you're telling them a story, they have to process form and meaning. They have to be able to build that connection. I think that is the beauty of dynamic usage-based approaches. This is the beauty of working with task-based language teaching, CLIL, or working with emergent language, working with affordances and things like that. It's because you give learners an opportunity to learn languages in a way that is more natural, in a way where they're not going to be questioning, ooh, what preposition do I use here? Ooh, should I use a verb here? They're not questioning themselves. They're just using the language. And of course, as they're using, their fluency, their accuracy is going to go through moments of instability. They're going to go through moments of stability until they are finally normalized. But it takes time. And I think you said something also very important, Audrey, which is, I think it's scary because teachers want to have control. And I think it was Paul Nation who said, it's a very difficult thing for teachers to accept, but you have absolutely no control over what is learned. Yet we still feed this illusion that what is taught is what's going to be learned, right?
That's exactly one of the teacher beliefs we talked about at the beginning of our conversation, those urban legends out there. And with my work with teachers, it takes 6 months more or less of almost monthly courses to get rid of those teacher beliefs.
Where
and after they are quite free, but but before that they do challenge those ideas.
So here's my question to you: how do these beliefs become deeply ingrained? Like where do you think they're coming from in your context?
They are coming from a gift forward from the past and a systemic problem in education and how teachers are seen as a profession. So in our context, for example, I've been a teacher trainer at the Master of Education. And so I have had teachers in education who were about to start their service and had those ideas like, usage-based approach. This is exactly what I want to do. And I mean, now we talked about AIM, but if you want to do usage-based, there's so many other things. You name TBLT. We also have FLIL with this film language integrated learning where you can use film. So many things you could try. And then we have a conference every year in January where they come back to the university and I see them 3-4 years after and I ask them, so how is it going? You know, all your ideas, they were very good, but it doesn't work in practice.
Oh.
And then I have this deep feeling of disappointment, like, how did I let them down somewhere? What happened is that when you start after university where you have actually a lot of information, you have this information when you don't need it. You need it later. You need this information when you have your class under control, when your class management is good, when you're not insecure anymore about how to manage a classroom of teenagers. When you have this level of insecurity, you rely a lot on your colleagues, on their expertise, on what they do. And if they tell you, well, you know, we tried that, doesn't work, you don't do it. And you lose this idea. And then when you have your class under control, you have a new challenge, which is to keep them learning. And so the content of what you teach becomes a bit less important. We can have a very good narrative with ourselves while we don't do things. And the narrative here is, well, look, it doesn't work. I have my classroom now. They listen to me. They do what I tell them. I mastered that. So maybe I would just continue to do what has been done until now. And now I'm exaggerating a lot because there are also people want to change or drivers of change. But the system makes it difficult because they have very little time to really make that change, have the time to review their programs, create their own activities, go to schooling after their work. So if you ask me why, I would say it's something like that. I don't know if you can relate in Canada, but in the Netherlands.
Yeah. I think we've been in staff rooms, Leo, where exactly. We've been in staff rooms where there is that kind. There's, I don't know, some what's the word I'm looking for? There's some angst against this kind of growth mindset, right? Where no, it's worked this way in the past. Let's just keep doing it that way, and it just hasn't worked. Yeah.
It hasn't worked.
It's even worse now in the Netherlands. It's even worse. I think we may be a bit late now if we wanted to have learners enthusiastic for languages.
Really?
Because we are now at a point where teenagers that are 18 and choose a study do not choose languages.
Wow.
So we have empty programs. Empty. It's okay. We still have 90 students. But to become a French teacher at the moment in the Netherlands, there are 4 universities who offer that program. And in our university, we have 1 enrollment for all the north of the Netherlands.
That's insane.
So we pushed it so far that in high school, they think, language learning, that's boring.
Yeah.
I didn't learn anything.
Again,
7 years long.
Again, because it's being treated like another subject. And I think that's the bane of language teaching, is that we are treating such a beautiful and powerful thing like history, chemistry, math, where you have all these rules, you need all this information in order to be able to learn those things, whereas languages are so different. So different. And I don't think it's very
Right.
different, Audrey. I don't think it's very different from here. I think Mike would agree with me. I see a lot of teachers who are still on the structure-based instruction. They rely heavily on teaching grammatical rules explicitly, using gap fills. And the difference I'm noticing is this generation of students, this generation that is coming now, they're not as receptive to this kind of learning anymore. They have evolved, but we haven't.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we have to make the shift because we are under pressure now of AI and all the tools that are very practical to translate something or use languages. And if we lose what language learning and be multilingual really is and bring to us, not only a skill, but something in our human nature of being curious of each other, I don't think it's a very good thing to do. And if we don't, also with the job of being a teacher, if we don't inspire vocation to the new generation to become teachers.
That's right. Yeah.
I mean, I live in a democracy where people have to think critically, have to make their own mind, have to be inspired by teachers.
Yes.
Who they see the whole day.
That's right.
So if nobody trained does that anymore, I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, I think you touched on a couple things. I think you're right. They need to see themselves in the curriculum for one. They need to see how it relates to their lives outside. And I think that's the importance of these dynamic approaches. And I think also you touched on this idea of just tolerance and being able to get along with your neighbor. Learning languages for me when I was a student was, I'm learning German or I'm learning French because I want to talk to people from those countries. I want to associate with them. I want to perhaps move there or travel there or do right. And those are the sorts of values, in this world, this time in particular, where, we really should be encouraging and motivating students to be curious about one another and find ways to kind of, build bridges, right? And language is such a powerful tool. So if they're giving up on language, how are they building those bridges, right?
Yeah.
We have here a professor called Merel Kaiser. She has a very nice research about cognitive decline and the role of language learning, second language learning in a later age. And she finds really positive effects also of having your brain learning a new language or a new instrument, but learning something new, because language learning uses many different parts of your brain, and so keeps you active in many different parts, and grow older and healthier. Also comes with continue to learn something.
I think my question for you, because I know you've also done research on communicative language teaching, and this is an area that I'm very interested in. I definitely want to bring communicative language teaching back to the forefront of language. But where do you think it all went wrong, in your opinion, Audrey?
Lack of constructive alignment.
What do you mean by that?
Constructive alignment is the fact that you have a program, a curriculum that is coherent in terms of assessment and also what you teach. And this lack of coherence have costed us, I think, the communicative approach we wanted. If you test your learners with vocabulary tests, with grammar tests, you don't teach communicatively.
Yes.
So you spend time teaching them how to strategically answer a question.
Yes.
And when you have constructive alignment and you want to teach communicatively, then you have to think of communicative tasks, formative and summative tasks, so to test them, assess them. There is a PhD of Charline Rouffet. She's from the University of Utrecht. She just had her PhD a couple of weeks ago about constructive alignment, about assessments in communicative language teaching. And she shows it very well that if you think of your assessment in a way that you want to assess communicative skill, automatically what you will provide to your learners in class is communicative teaching. So we have to rethink the way we assess things.
I know because I
Leo's
experienced
experienced
that
this.
first.
Yeah.
I experienced that firsthand. I was working for a very specific institution here. And of course, the curriculum was entirely structure-based. It was like week 1, they learn, adjective clauses. Week 2, they learn this. And I'm like, where's the communicative goal here? Like, why are they using all of these things? So I decided to just change the whole thing into a task-based course. So I designed tasks for each week. But of course, I couldn't change the assessment, Audrey, mind you, because the assessment was already pre-designed for that very specific course. So even though my students were communicating, they were performing, they were doing really well, they were engaged, they were motivated, they wanted to come to class, when they took the exams, they failed miserably. And I had issues with that. I had issues because they had to pass, and eventually I got in trouble. So I realized that constructive alignment in terms of curriculum is extremely important. So we have to assess the way we teach. And if you want to try to do something different, you might encounter that kind of problem. So I think that I want to ask you one more question about dynamic use. So what, based on your research, what have been some of the long-term benefits that you've found of using dynamic use-based approaches over structure-based approaches, according to the findings that you have and other researchers, of course?
According to the findings that I have, I show that there is an acceleration of the language learning development of oral skills at the beginning of the learning process. And when you take that very fast path at the beginning, you maintain this growth. What I found also is that it has a lot of beneficial effects on fluency and complexity. And if I compared it with a structure-based approach, it was very similar in terms of accuracy. So why torture our students?
Very interesting.
If you end up with the same in terms of accuracy, but that it's better in terms of fluency and complexity. So it was true for oral skills and true for written skills. And I tried to remember if I found something in terms of motivation of
I would assume that they're probably more motivated to go to a class where they're actually using the language. They're trying to, because I think this is another thing too, is when you work with dynamic usage-based approaches, when you work with task-based, I think it's a meaning is such an important thing that you forget about, like, oh, I have to memorize this grammar rule so I can say it. It's almost as if like there's no compliance to do what the teacher asks you to do. The only thing you need to do is I need to be able to express meaning in a way that is intelligible to my interlocutor. And because they have to struggle to do that, I think for some reason, language seems to, you're exercising your language skills more, your cognitive abilities a lot more than just sitting passively being lectured on when to use who, when to use that, and when to use which.
Yeah. And I told you before that I feel very much responsible also to make learning and school interesting and fun for people who are not analytical, scholar, and that because I spend a lot of time in school, right? So it has to be fun for everyone. And it's true that with those approaches, you can see that it talks to people who like PE, physical education. Yeah. Because it's a bit the same principles. If you want to learn how to play, I don't know. So my colleague Wim Gombert always used the metaphor with ping pong. How do you call it in English?
Table tennis.
Table tennis,
ping pong. Yes.
With table tennis, how do you learn that gesture to do it, and then it's not only about the gesture. It's also in the complex environment of playing with a partner. And you have to react and co-adapt, etc. It's a bit like language learning. But you don't do that by somebody tell you, so if you put your left hand this way, and then, or if you're that's another scholar that uses this. Is Jan Hulstein, I think, who uses that metaphor a lot from the swimming, and that I relate a lot because my husband he works for the Olympic swimming team, so I see them always, all those swimmers going into the pool, and I'm sure that they didn't learn by somebody telling them, so this is how you swim.
Yes.
You put your hand like this and your foot like this. Okay, now we're going to throw you in the pool. No, it's not how it works. You go in the pool and you practice slowly in the pool, in the environment. So I think language learning is more like that.
Yeah. And you make
new connections.
because you're making connections with your body and the water. Very much you're doing with language, with form and meaning. You have to do that naturally.
Yeah. And with a lot of practice and a lot of repetition. I have to say, though, that dynamic users-based approaches is for some learners that are cognitively very, very analytical, quite a challenge because they don't understand right away what's going on. And some learners, they want to understand. They really would love to understand. And so for those, the role of the teacher is crucial. Because you have to reassure them that they are still learning, and now they don't understand, but they will understand later.
That's a good point.
It's the other way around.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah,
it's definitely challenging, but I usually like to say, I wrote this down because I was thinking about this. I think everyone here, you guys have heard of that so-called intermediate plateau, right? People say that students get to a level that they don't progress. Yeah. I actually have a theory based on what you just said now, Audrey. I think the intermediate plateau happens because we don't have any more grammatical structures to teach.
Right. Yeah.
If you think about it, Mike, we only have like a certain number of grammatical structures to teach. And you will normally teach them all the way from like A1 to B1. After that, they have to develop, as you said, complexity. But for them to develop that complexity, I don't know if they're going to be able to do that after they've learned all these rules. Because now they have to, as you said, they have to put all these little parts that they've learned together into a whole. And that's much more difficult than learning the whole and then thinking, oh, I have all these different parts. Now I can use them in different ways. So
in different situations, more
in different situations,
right? Yeah.
As opposed to like, I'm already learning how to use this in different situations. Now I'm going to look at these little parts. So a lot of the things you said, Audrey, make a lot of sense and are very much, to use a term that we like here, very much aligned with how we see language learning. Which brings me to a question. Let's imagine that we have a teacher who currently uses he relies heavily on a structure-based approach to teaching. What do you think, or what kind of recommendation, what advice would you give to a teacher who wants to begin to incorporate dynamic usage-based principles into their teaching? What practical advice would you give to those people?
Depending on where they work, if they see that their school would be open to really change things around, I would recommend to really change their teaching method and really try AIM or try TBLT, try something really different. But it's not very often that on your own you can convince your whole team to make that change. In that case, I would recommend to start some activities in the class just to try it out. Use a movie, for example, that your students will like very much, and take some time at home to create a lesson series of. I would recommend to do this to really take 2 or 3 lessons. So a lesson series, not to try it out 10 minutes in your class, but really make a series out of it. Use that movie, select some fragment of the movie, show them to the students, ask them to repeat the text, ask them to say to each other, and then ask them what they liked about the movie, what they saw, ask them to write a narrative about what they think will happen next. That could be a very nice couple of weeks where you work around that movie. And if you want to make it task real life like TBLT, you can say that they have to work towards writing a review about the movie. And then start like this. And next year, make another lesson series. you will see in 2-3 years, you will have enough lesson series to make a whole program.
Mhm.
And if you really want to be efficient, create a Facebook group join a Facebook group of teachers who are just like you, want to change things. All of you create 2 or 3 lesson series, share it with each other.
Mhm. Yeah.
Nice.
As you said, it has to start from the bottom up. I think if we're going to rely on people who are the top of the chain, I don't think we're going to implement any change in language education.
Well, our learners will be on the top of the chain one day.
I've noticed that when I'm in the classroom, when I'm teaching, I notice the difference between the students who have been exposed to a teacher who strictly follows a structure-based approach versus me, who is very like, the best way to define my lessons is they're very chaotic. I kind of tell them, like, I'm going to give you a lot of dots. Some of them you're going to collect and then connect. Some of them you're just going to see them over and over again. But that's kind of how I see dynamic usage based. That's how I see complexity theory in language learning and language education is you're just shooting many shots, and some things will be internalized by some learners because as you said, they're ready for that. Sometimes they're not ready. That takes time. But I have accepted, and I think that's the important thing for a lot of us teachers to understand, is that we have to accept that we have absolutely no control over what happens here. We just have to create the opportunities. We have to create opportunities. We provide, as you said, a very rich environment with full of affordances and opportunities for language, for them to be using the language, and then hope for the best. As you said, trust the process. I think as language teachers, we still, to a certain extent, I think we still deal a lot with what Bill Van Patten calls the Atlas complex. We want to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. We want to be responsible for everything that happens in the classroom. But there's just, the only things we can do is we can control these variables, the kind of input, the kind of movies that we select, the kind of tasks that we use in the classroom. Those things we can control. Everything else is beyond our control, which leads to another very important question. What is, in your opinion, the future of language teaching? What do you see? Because we just talked about how, in the Netherlands, you're having issues with people not wanting to become language teachers. And one of your passions is inspiring people to become language teachers. And I think it's the same in North America. I don't think people are actively choosing to be a teacher. Quite the opposite. People are looking for other areas, other fields, because I don't think language teaching is attracting people as much anymore. So how can we inspire people to become language teachers? What can we do to help them become language teachers, or inspire them to become language teachers?
Yeah. I saw a poster at a conference last week. It was written, "You don't need to be a celebrity to be unforgettable." And to me, that's exactly what a teacher is. It's an anonymous person who is unforgettable in the mind of many learners when he's a good and a bad teacher. But you hope you hope that our vision is to really have good teachers that have a positive impact on their learners. Politically, something has to change if you want to change how we see teachers. So being a teacher is not only a passion, it's also a profession.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to have a very professional context in which teachers have the space to, because they are the professional. They don't need to rely on textbooks because that somebody else wrote for them. If they are professionals and know what they do and know what they want, they have to gain also that confidence that they are the ones who have that knowledge. They can see themselves as professionals. And I would like also to stress the fact that being a teacher is showing ambition.
Yeah. Oh, I like
right? Because it's not because you're not ambitious that you became teacher. You're very ambitious, in fact.
I agree.
Because the ambition to really make a difference, to give forward to a new generation. You need to be very ambitious to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so to give a bit more status to that profession.
I like.
And it's not only about the money, though, because it's, of course, you need to have a decent amount of money when you do that job. It's very important that you don't struggle to be a teacher yourself. But we see in our country that they did raise the salary of teachers. And for the moment, there are not really many more people who want to become teachers. So it's not always about the salary. Yeah. It's also about the expectation of this society of having a career and have this status of growth. Well, you can do that also being a teacher. And someday you can become teachers of the teachers. Mm-hmm. And in my classes, I've had learners who became game changers in other fields. And I've been very proud to have been able to teach them. Mm-hmm. There's a political answer in a way. Society also, school is the place where learners spend most time when they are teenager, but then still need to be educated by their parents. So that's also the communication between the parents and the school, and that has to go much better. Mm-hmm. And the value of school and home is very important to discuss. So there is a society discussion also to have. Mm-hmm. And inside of the schools, I really hope that schools would become places of innovation, change, of inclusivity also of all kinds of learners and teachers, where creativity can come back a bit less administrative, a bit less filling a form to say that it was qualitatively good, and give that time to actually give quality in the classroom. I think that would help a lot.
I agree. Mike, you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, I just, and maybe I'm switching gears a little bit, but I think this ties into some of the points we discussed earlier about giving up control and engagement, and now inclusivity. And that is your work on multilingual approaches. And I just thought it might be nice to kind of dovetail into a little bit of what do we mean when we think of multilingual approaches, and perhaps what have been some of the challenges in implementing some of these approaches, since we're on this topic.
Right. And it's a broad topic because there are many contexts in which you can use that term, multilingualism. So I can tell you about my context, the one I do research on. And I do research in multilingualism in higher education. It means that I work in a bilingual university where English and Dutch is used as main languages of instruction. But I also work in a language program where we teach German, Russian, Spanish, French, Italian, Swedish, and English, and Dutch as a second language. So it would be wrong to think that English is the only lingua franca we can have together.
Right, yeah.
So my work is also about including all those other languages and removing also the idea that because we talk in English, we're more inclusive. Sometimes we are not. So that's this work about giving. So I teach in 8 different languages in the same classroom. And I do that because my learners are language learners. And for me, it's a way to provide them more exposure, more opportunity to use, which is in line with the dynamic usage-based theories I've been working on. But multilingualism could also happen in a history class that is normally taught in English because it will be easier for everybody to understand, but where you include as well the languages taught by your learners, because a lot of our learners are internationals. They come from Romania, they come from Germany. And when you do that, you also bring a lot of identity, culture, very interesting talks about different perspectives about the same topic. So what we do is that when we talk about a topic, we read a paper in English, but I ask my students to also find a paper in another language about this topic. to see if the perspective is maybe different due to cultural differences.
Mhm.
Because I think it would be wrong to think that because we read a paper in English, that's exactly the way everybody thinks.
Right. Yes.
So we do that. We read on the same topic in 4, 5 different languages, and then they come back in the classroom and we talked about, so what did you learn? Did they actually think the same as in English or not? And why? And we have very deep discussions about it's interculturality through language.
Right.
So that's the kind of multilingualism that I am doing. But of course, multilingualism is so broad that we could, I don't know which kind you wanted to talk
We
about.
could devote an entire podcast episode to
I
this.
was just going to say,
Right.
yeah. But I think it's and just listening now, it kind of speaks to what Michael Byram has written about, like, about the intercultural speaker, right? Like that sure, great, we have these languages that we operate in most of the time, but we also need to be encouraging individuals to be open to, as you suggest, hearing things in different ways in different languages, and then thinking a little bit about some of those similarities and where those differences might occur. And I think the only way to do that is to engage the students, as you suggest, in different ways, like looking at multiple perspectives.
And it's very hands-on, because I'm a strong believer in the fact that when you introduce something new in the classroom, a new tool, a new technology, you need to do it with them in the classroom at the beginning, and to really don't assume they know how to do it. I've been disappointed before. So now when I introduced this multilingual approach, we really took a week of training so that they could learn how do you manage, how do you cope with a multilingual environment? How do you cope when the person next to you speaks a language you never heard before, and you have the feeling you don't understand anything, and you have the feeling you're excluded? So I give them tools, I give them a lot of strategical things. We practice translanguaging pedagogy, mediation, such as in the CEFR. We practice as well lingua receptiva, which is a way to passively try to understand a language and responding in another language. We practice clear approaches. We practice how can I, when I know that my crowd is not speaking my language, what can I do to help them, to ease them into understanding me? Because in fact, if they don't understand me, it's my problem. It's not their problem. So we do that very hands-on 1 week. And after that, it goes very well.
I need that kind of training with my teenagers, because I feel
Well,
like
yeah,
we speak different languages.
I was just saying, it's like, I think it'd be very practical in many vocational environments as well. It's like how to be a sympathetic interlocutor, right? And what are some ways that you can ease or make the conversation go more smoothly, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And many of those ideas, really, it's the colleague that I have, Wim Gombert. We've been talking a lot. Mariah Michel, which is also my colleague, who is also an extraordinary person. These are all people who in fact tries to use research and theories, but use them in practice and really practice what you preach.
Yeah, we definitely
Amen.
need more of that. Yeah, we definitely need more of that. We're coming to a wrap here. But right before we end this, I would like to share with you a little tradition that we have on the show. So Andrew is the one who often does this, but in his absence, I will take the lead and explain to you exactly what we do. So we always ask our current guest, in this case you, a question that was left by a previous guest on the show. That guest has no idea who the next guest is going to be. So they just ask a very random question, which I will ask you. So that's the first part of the surprise. So the question that our previous guest left for you, Audrey, is this one. What would you like language classrooms to look like 10 years from now? So it's 2030. What would you like classrooms to look like by then?
It's very funny because the preface of my PhD thesis is about my vision of an ideal classroom of the future. And so I really hope that in 2024, people will still learn together. So not only online, but also really together. And I hope that the classroom is quite noisy. I hope that from the outside, you hear the noise inside. You hear the dynamics of people talking to each other, laughing. And I hope that you walk next to that classroom and you see tables in groups like this a bit everywhere, learners sitting on the table, the teacher moving from tables to tables in a dynamic way. And I hope that they think, oh, these guys, they have fun. So that's what I hope for the future.
Great.
you.
Sounds like an amazing classroom to aspire
wanna
to
be
have
there.
in the
Yeah.
future. Yeah. The second part of the question, Audrey, is what question would you like to leave for our next guest? You don't know who this person is.
Our
Yes,
next-
you don't know who this person
No,
is.
I don't
so
know.
you just have to ask a
I
question.
don't know.
It could be any sort of question. It doesn't have to be anything related to teaching. It could be anything you would want to ask.
Right. So the question that I would like to ask, I have to take a minute to think about this because in my mind right now, I have 15 questions. So I have to select one. Okay. I guess I have a question about how can we engage learners, pupils, to study language?
Okay.
So how
Beautiful.
how can we make sure that there are people who just, I mean, we loved languages and we decided to study it for the love of it.
Mm,
And now I see that it's less and less the case.
Mhm.
So how can we do?
mhm.
It's not the case that people don't like the arts anymore. It can
Yeah.
be something else. So how can we engage the future generation to study language?
That's a good question. I'm just taking notes
Nice.
here.
Yeah, I'm very curious about this response because then I'll try to put that into
The
action.
next guest will
That's
be
the
asked that
connection,
exact
right?
same question. Yeah. Audrey, thank you very much for making the time to be here. We really appreciate you and the work that you do. I've always wanted to talk to you. You have come to us highly recommended by you know who. And I'm really happy that we had a chance to talk to you and you were able to share your expertise with us.
Thank you for the invitation. It's a dream come true, I have to say.
Oh my. Thank you.
Thank you.